I hope you don't think I'm going off track, but as I saw in the verses that we had today, this was surely an example of faith. We don't hear a lot about faith. I don't know how people can go through life without it. God can't do anything if we don't have faith, even as a grain of mustard seed. So you don't have to have great, overwhelming faith, just a little bit, and God can use that. But we're living in days of great deception, and there's lots of false teaching. And I want to start by reading you a passage, not from the Bible, but one that almost moves me to tears as I read it. Because we're dealing with a real God, and we've been singing about hymns of a faithful God who loves us and who is real. But do we really know what is real these days? There's so much imitation and artificial, false teaching, even in the church. This is just an extract from a little book called The Velveteen Rabbit, if you've heard of that, by Marjorie Williams. "What is real?" asked the rabbit one day, when they were lying side by side near the nursery fender, before Nana came to tidy the room. "Does it mean having things that buzz inside you and a stick-out handle?" "Real isn't how you are made," said the skin horse. "It's a thing that happens to you. When a child loves you for a long, long time, not just to play with, but really loves you, then you become real." "Does it hurt?" asked the rabbit. "Sometimes," said the skin horse, for he was always truthful. "When you are real, you don't mind being hurt." "Does it happen all at once, like being wound up?" he asked. "Or bit by bit?" "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." I suppose you are real," said the rabbit. And then he wished he had not said it, for he thought the skin horse might be sensitive. But the skin horse only smiled. "The boy's uncle made me real," he said. "That was a great many years ago. But once you are real, you can't become unreal again. It lasts for always." Well, that's a sermon all in itself, isn't it? But I want us to think, faith that these Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego demonstrated, that was a genuine thing. But many people today, even in churches, sometimes think that faith is a good luck charm so that things go well. If you have enough faith and you pray, and you become blind, for example, are you always going to be healed? If you have enough faith. If you have enough faith and you need £1,000, do you just need to wait for the postman to pop a cheque through the letterbox? If you're planning to go on a picnic tomorrow, if you pray and have enough faith, does it mean that you'll have a sunny day? But there is a farmer who is also praying urgently that for the clouds to open and to save his crop. And he is praying for rain. So what is faith? Is faith a good luck charm so that things will always go well? Is this idea of health, wealth and prosperity gospel really biblical? If I pray, I will always be healthy. If I just pray, everything is to go right in my family. If I just pray, I'm always going to have a good job. If I just have enough faith, may sound good, but it is a sugar-coated, superficial faith that doesn't work for people who are going through incredible crises in their lives. Faith is trusting God when things do not go well. It's a strong belief in a God who loves and cares for us in the darkest moments of our lives. What is faith? It is a relationship with God as with a friend well known, knowing that he will never harm me, he will never hurt me. It's knowing that whatever we go through in life, we can trust him, and he is there. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in this chapter are going into the fiery flames, and we see that God went with them into those flames. God not only delivers us from the flames, but at times when we go through sickness, at times when we go through economic difficulty, and times when we face poverty. I want to share a little bit about a former friend of mine who became one of my spiritual mentors. He was a retired clergyman who had an astounding faith in God. And he was blind. He was a friend of my parents, and I had met him when he'd come to preach at my father's church. The late John Robb, if any of you knew him, wrote a little book called What a Blind Man Sees in the 23rd Psalm. He lived at Eckling Grange, which is near Dereham, which is a home for retired missionaries and clergy. He'd been a Christian for quite a number of years when he suddenly became blind. And those in the church said, "John, we must pray for you, because it can't be that God wants you to be blind." Well, they prayed for him, but he didn't receive his sight. So he said, "Well, this means I have a problem. I'm still blind." And they said, "Well, John, it might be because you just don't have enough faith." Well, I can't believe that, because I knew him. And they kept praying, and he still remained blind. And then they said, "We've been praying for you, John, and we believe that it could be that there's a sin in your life. That's why God is not able to heal you miraculously." Well, John remained blind, but he was one of the most seeing men I've ever seen in my life. Because he said until he became blind, he hadn't seen. But when they told him this, he said, I've now got 3 things wrong in my life. I'm blind, I don't have enough faith, and I have got sin in my life. Was that a bit like Job's friends causing all this sort of trouble? It made him very depressed, as you would be if all your Christian friends were telling you these things were wrong with you. And then someone, because he wasn't able to read except with Braille, reminded him of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, when they were cast into the flames of life. In the midst of the flames, Jesus Christ leapt into those flames, and he was there with them. We need to understand that faith is not believing just what we want to happen, but faith is rather trusting God no matter what. Faith is rather looking through our tears and knowing he is there. Faith is looking through our heartache and knowing that he has not left us. Faith is weeping our eyes out at night and knowing that he will never leave us or forsake us. Faith is listening to the still, small voice that says, have courage, as there are better days coming. Faith is trusting God in whatever we go through. Daniel had faith in the lion's den. Joseph had faith when he was cast into a pit by his brothers. Moses had faith when he led the children of Israel through the Red Sea. The Apostle Paul had faith when he was stoned, shipwrecked, and beaten. And Jesus Christ had faith when he hung on a cross with nails through his hands and thorns on his head and darkness all around him. And Peter denied him, and the Romans crucified him, and he hung there on that cross and said, Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. You see, that's faith. Faith is trusting God when we cannot see. Faith is not just sight, and sight is not faith. If faith was sight, it would not take faith. So faith is only faith when we cannot see. Trust God anyway. And this is what happened to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Faith is believing that God is there even when things go bad. God can take the brokenness of our lives, and he can also take the problems in our lives. He can take our difficulties, and he uses all of these things as a magnet to draw us into a closer relationship with him. Let's look at Daniel, verse 3, 19 to 20. This is what the scripture says. Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. Another key point. The furnace was heated 7 times hotter. A universal leader passes a universal world decree. The command is to violate the commands of God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego will not violate the second command. and worship an idol. There is a death decree. The furnace is heated 7 times hotter. There is a time of trouble, greater than any time of trouble. I wonder if Daniel 3 can be an object lesson for the end time people. End time people will find every earthly support will be cut off. End time people will experience a church in union with the state. End time people will experience the fiery flames again. Could this chapter in Daniel be an object lesson that teaches us to trust God, that our faith in God should carry us through the crises of life today and in the crises that are coming to our world tomorrow? As we read our scriptures, we know they are just round the corner. Are we not approaching the end times? Let's look at verses 20 to 23. And commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, and turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are thrown into the fiery furnace. But what happened? The only thing that is burned is the bonds that bound them. The people who cast them into the furnace were all destroyed, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were unharmed. This is fascinating. How can we understand that? It's amazing. Now, verses 24 and 5. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leapt up to his feet in amazement and asked the advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, Your Majesty." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Notice that they were bound and thrown into the fire, but the only thing that the flames do is burn and consume the bonds that bound them. Are you going through a fiery trial just now? Do you know someone else who is? Have you lost a job and don't know how to pay the bills? Is there some sickness that no one else knows about? Are you caring for an aged loved one and it's very difficult for you? Are you going through some difficulty and challenge, which is like walking through that fire? Faith knows that God is with you as you go through the flames. Faith is a relationship with God as with a well-known friend, knowing that in every circumstance of life, he will never leave us. He will never forsake us. And the only thing that the fiery trial will do is burn the bonds that tied us to earth. It will give us a desire in our hearts of eternity that the world can never give. When we go through the flames of life, God is there. Now, I heard a story, I didn't actually see it, but I heard a story about a man who bred canaries. And the story goes that he knew how to teach canaries to sing. And I understood it that he would take a male bird and put it in a box and cover it with a thick black cloth. And then he would sit by the box and I don't quite know how canaries sing, do you? Do you know, any of you know a canary song? Being in Norwich, we should know canary song, shouldn't we? And before long, the bird would start to sing. Now, if you're going through a dark time in your life, God is trying to teach you to sing. He's teaching us to sing a song of praise. He's teaching us to sing a song of hope. He's teaching us to sing a song of joy as we go through the trials of life. And we can hear him encouraging us and giving us hope. As we learn to sing today, we'll also be able to sing when the world goes crazy at the end time. When we'll see the universality of a world ruler and union of the church and state, and everything that we read about in the book of Revelation, when it seems that the world around us is all against us. And when the time comes that we read about in Revelation chapter 13, when we cannot buy or sell, we will have heard the song of the Master, and he is with us every moment of our life, and we know that he is there to strengthen us. In verse 25, it says that Nebuchadnezzar sees Jesus in the flames with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. The good news is that Jesus also leaps into the flames of our lives.